Good morning and welcome to the very first webinar of our Fall 2020 series. So this semester we're going to be talking about political socialization. Where do you get your politics? So today we are happy to have with us Professor Kimberly Cox. Professor Cox is the instructor of government at Connect. In addition, we have Misty Wilson-Mertens, who is our social sciences chair, and I'm Angela Thurman. I'm the chair of economics and sciences. So welcome, Professor Cox. We're excited to hear what you have to say today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
What is political socialization? I get the political part, but when you say socialization, what does that mean?
Hi, everyone. So political socialization, I think where it first comes up in classes that I do is students will often say, how do I know what political party I stand with? I don't understand the parties and the candidates. How does someone become a Democrat or Republican? And so I always tell them that we need to first see where we stand. I think that we're often taught how to identify other people, but we don't do a lot of self-reflection, if that makes sense, to see where our identity is. So political socialization is the process by which people acquire beliefs, values, and habits of thought and action related to government, politics, and society. And so when we're born, we don't have any political ideology, I would say. And so we learn this from older generations, and there's various ways that can happen. We'll talk about the agents of socialization soon, but I think what's really interesting about political socialization and how we learn our belief value systems or where we attain these is that some of the studies that have been done in the past were saying, well, once you learn it early on and, through childhood, adolescence up to adulthood, it's pretty much an enduring and persistent factor. But I think new studies that are happening now say that that's not really the case, that political identity can shift over time. In basically in reaction to how government performs, how we're impacted by different events or people around us, and that term is called rational updating. So I think that what we're learning now is it's a lifelong process that impacts our belief and value systems that's constantly changing over time, and that's what political socialization is.
Great. Okay, so here's a question. Once you have decided that, okay, yes, I am this party, is this something that is ongoing and changes over time?
I think it does change. We have these two ideas of primary and secondary socialization, and so as you see the icons up there, we'll go through those, but primary socialization is where a child learns attitudes, values, and actions through their family. Basically, think of primary as things that happen in the home. First, that's where we're exposed most, is in the home with family. And then there's secondary socialization, which we'll talk about in these other, the later icons, where you move out into the world and you're impacted by, as a member of a smaller group within society, impacted by religion, education, social media, etc. So I heard this analogy once, and I really like it, is that we have this bookshelf that holds our political values, identities, and behaviors. It's empty when we're born, and then during childhood and adolescence, those shelves slowly fill up through stories and just information received from various agents of socialization. And so things we're exposed to the political world, political information, and ideas. And as that bookshelf gets full, we start to kind of form a more clear political identity. So if someone asks us, what do we think about an issue or a candidate, we can pull from that bookshelf that we've stored with all that information. And then to form new ideas, this is where I think we'll get into later that it does shift. We may have to switch out some of those books on the bookshelf as we experience new things or learn new things.
Got it. That's a really good analogy.
So before we apply this specifically to politics, we do just want to talk about what those agents of socialization could be. And there is no magic formula here. Something might weight more heavily for you, Professor Thurman, than it does for me. But these are the kind of combinations that we can put together that will help us figure out where we land.
Okay, so can you go through each one of these and just sort of give a little synopsis of what these are? I get the first is family. The second is, I guess, is religion, correct?
Right. So let's start with family.
Okay, so family, and I apologize, you guys, if you get, there is construction going on across from my house and this morning, unfortunately. So if you hear cars moving back and forth, I apologize. But family is your first and really your most basic agent of socialization. Again, it's where you spend the most time in your youth is with your parents and your family. And so it's considered to be one of the main socialization agents and transmission of basic political orientations. And so, if your family is politically active, the thought process is that you will be politically active. If your family is not politically active, does not discuss politics often, you will not be. I want to say that family, one thing in looking at this topic over time is that it really depends on the conversations I think you have with your family. Do you sit around the dinner table and discuss, history and politics with them, or do you not? And I think that'll have a huge impact on how your family socializes you. And there's this question now that's coming up too, which when we get to social media, I think is a great question. As kids spend more time on social media, are parents really transmitting their values and beliefs effectively to children? And so that's something I think as we kind of go forward and you see studies on this, that'll be something that'll come up. Is this used to be that, you had TV later in life and kids were, I know when I was younger, and I'm going to really date myself, you played outside, you weren't in front of the TV or on social media all the time. So how does this new kind of wrinkle, so to speak, impact that family socialization?
So one of the next ones that's considered very, very important to a lot of people is going to be religion. So what studies have shown us is that religion does produce a high level of conformity among congregants, but not always in the same direction and not uniformly. So if we look at those who identify themselves as Jewish, 68% of those also identify themselves as Democrats. But if we look at evangelical Protestants, only 25% would identify themselves as Democrats. So both are religious, both are invested in their religious community, but their religious community and the values transmitted there have pushed them into different groups. We also know that the more actively you participate in a religion, the more influence that religion will have on you. That's kind of basic. It makes sense. But someone could be religious without being an active participant, and then that wouldn't have as much of an effect on their political socialization as somebody who is being actively conditioned by a group, if that makes more sense to you guys. For everyone here, the next one's probably very important.
Yeah, the next one is education. And so I think that, once you have family, which I covered, the next big agent is going to be education. Think about how much time you spend in school and the impact that it has on you. And so I think the big question beyond that is how much political knowledge do you gain at school? It's one of the first environments where we have contact with people outside of our family and our siblings, our other family members, grandparents, etc. And so I think we have to look at education and what types of topics are covered. It may be your first introduction to elections, voting, campaigning, the three branches of government. But I know that Missy and I have talked about this is I think it really depends too on the curriculum that your high school, for example, because that's usually when you're going to get, the basics of this, what they cover, your teachers, and then we get into higher education. Does higher education, those who have a higher education, does that impact your political socialization when it comes to education? Because the assumption, I think, is that if you go into higher education, you're going to get even more political information and basically given to you, and so that can have an impact as well.
I think being from Texas, this next one's really important, regionalism. So when we look historically at both of the parties, they were much broader than they are now. And so parties had to hold these very loose coalitions. If you think about the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Democrats, we had New York and Texas as the two anchors of that party. And today, the idea that New York and Texas are going to get along politically, I think is very foreign to most of us. So where you grow up, what time you grow up in, all of that can affect your political outlook.
And I think the last one we have on here is media. Media, and I lumped in peers with this because we do so much communication with our peers on social media. Media, I want to look at it in a broader sense, I guess, too, is TV. If you listen to podcasts, I get social media, but they'll think of radio, even if you listen to radio still. Any kind of books that you might read, newsprint, but all of this kind of is the media piece of it. And social media, I think, amplifies your belief system by who you talk to, what you share, how do you know what is true? Do you have a balanced media diet on social media too? So I think that all these things are things that you have to kind of think about when you look at media, is the impact, and are you also diversifying your news when you look at social media, or are you just looking at articles that agree with you or talking to people who agree with you? So I think, all of that is part of social media. Most of the studies I've seen look at it reinforcing one's views. Sorry, I got cut off there, but sorry. But one of the things I think is that they're looking at is that a lot of us are in a bubble, and that we're reinforced by what we're looking at. Our views are reinforced.
I think social media has really made that so, one, easy to go out and find other views, but then also hard, because I don't like other views, right? I just want to read my own.
Yeah, it's this idea of, I think, and also too, the algorithms. That's one of the things that it was looking at, the algorithms, that if you're constantly looking at the same type of news, you're going to be fed that type of news. Think about even just when you go on Amazon and you shop for something, all of a sudden you're given all these ads for that same thing. I mean, it's crazy, and social media does the same thing, I think. So the question is, does this expose people to different views? Are you in an echo chamber where you're only interacting with like-minded people? So this next slide is, where do Americans get their news? I thought this was really interesting. It was from a Pew Research analysis of surveys, and they look at 2016 to 2018, and you have television dropping, you can see, from 57 to 49%, but you have social media here and news websites. I think we can, kind of combine into internet. Social media, what the analysis was, is that people who are on social media aren't necessarily looking at social media for news. They're not looking at the hot topics of the day news-wise. They're looking at other items. And so for news sources itself, TV is still up there percentage-wise, which I was kind of surprised by. I'll be honest that it hasn't dropped more than that. If you dig further into this poll, which we don't have it, one of the reasons I think that the 49% is there is because local news in particular, most people still get their local news from TV, and they lumped local and national and international together into that 49%.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because I never, ever watch the news on TV. I get all of mine from, news feeds that I get that go directly to my inbox, or from, listening to podcasts or things like that. So I don't know if that's typical, but I cannot tell you the last time I sat down to watch the news.
I'm the same way. If I'm going to look at news, I do, and I will say I do look at the major news channels. I will kind of go on and just get a blip from the major news channels on TV. But if I'm going to read, it's on media, the internet, on social media, podcasts, the same thing. So I don't know where you fall on this.
I like to read my news. I feel like I get a better understanding of it if I read it. But I am one of those people that kind of constantly leaves the news on in the background just because I like the noise.
I'm the same way, and I get my news in the background sometimes. If I'm driving in the car, I still have satellite radio because I got it with my car and it's still there. So I'll listen to it while I'm driving as well, and it is more like a background thing. And I don't know if other people do that as well, but I do.
But that brings up another point. If we are choosing our media sources, then people do choose to listen to what they agree with, which means that there are many people that will not ever get both sides of the story, so to speak. And I think it is important for people to not only listen to the news and the news outlets that align with their beliefs, but I think it's important to also listen to the other side, just so that you get a balanced perspective. So what is your opinion on that?
So I think, other than listening to both sides, I think having a global perspective is really important. So I listen to a lot of BBC.
Yeah, I do too. I love the BBC.
I do. I like listening to both the BBC, NPR, those types of programs, radio-wise at least, or on podcasts where I can get what I consider a little bit more well-rounded idea of what the news is really. And I think also, too, if you diversify your media intake, you can see consistencies and inconsistencies. So if you have different news media outlets all saying the same thing, you're okay, they're all on the same page. But if they're all over the map, then you might start to question, well, okay, why is this so different? Why is this news outlet versus this one, or this domestic versus this foreign outlet saying such different or, conflicting stories? What's going on here? And I think that's where you can start to, say, hey, can I critically evaluate this in some way?
Okay, so explain this. I see the grid, and so how do you decide where you are on this grid?
So the first one is conservative, and I think you've got conservative and liberal, which would be the left-right side of the grid, going across the grid. And conservatives, as a general definition, believe in personal responsibility, limited government, free markets, individual liberty, traditional American values, and strong national defense. And they are more affiliated with the Republican Party, although you can be a conservative Democrat and a conservative Republican, I guess. But they're more typically, if you just in the general sense, related to the Republican Party. Other things that they do, let's see.
And just for students who aren't like well-versed in political lingo, generally when we talk about conservative, we're talking about the right. And when we talk about liberals, we're talking about the left.
Yes.
So if you hear those two terms, that's what people are saying.
Yeah, and liberals are, they believe in government action to achieve equal opportunity and equality for all. They believe that the government should more alleviate the social ills, protect civil liberties, individual and human rights. So there is more government intervention to fix social issues and for government to come in and step in and solve problems than you would have on the conservative side. The conservative side is more self-action, you do the hard work, take care of yourself, whereas on the liberal side of things, if people need help, there's that social aspect to it. We will kind of have programs in place to help or lift people out of those issues.
Okay. So this is a quiz. This link is a quiz that our students can click on, and then they can take the quiz for themselves, correct?
Correct, yeah. And
right.
What it'll do is the eyesight width is that there's Pew Research also has one that's used a lot, but the eyesight width quiz I like because on Pew Research, if you go into their quiz, it gives you two choices for answers. On the eyesight width one, you can click. It gives you two choices, but then you can click and get a field of choices, or you can put in other and you can type in your information and they will loop that into the quiz for further people to take. At the end of it, you get your results split out, and they also give you a My Ballot, which has candidates that fit your views by percentage. It's kind of interesting because a lot of students will say, hey, well, okay, now that I know I'm more this or that, depending on the percentages they get when they take the quiz, what candidates running on the ballot right now fit those percentages. And the eyesight width quiz actually does that. So that's what I like about it. So it'll go in and, rate the parties percentage-wise based on your answers that you give.
Okay, that is very interesting. Okay, so you can quiz me.
So, we were going to quiz Allegra, but she ditched us. So, pretend that says, let's quiz Angela.
Okay, quiz me. And this is even better because I don't know what to expect here.
Allegra didn't either. This was going to be a surprise.
Okay.
So we're going to read you some statements, and you have to guess where you think they are on that grid we gave you. So your choices would be conservative, liberal, independent, authoritarian, or libertarian. Are you ready?
Yes.
And you'll get points.
Oh, good.
So you want me to do the first one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the first one, oops, let me get to is I'm the great communicator. I famously said the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I believe in reducing the federal government's reach into our daily lives and pocketbooks of the Americans, including tax cuts intended to spur growth. I believe in an increase for military spending measures, deregulating business, and also, this one may help, I provided aid to the anti-communist movements in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to thwart the expanse of the evil empire.
Okay, that would be, I'm thinking Ronald Reagan, who would be conservative, Republican. Is that enough?
Yeah, you correct.
Got it.
Yay!
All right, the next one, let's see if I can. The next one, okay. I voted against the Iraq War and the Gulf War. I have gone against my church and faith and consistently advocated for women's right to choose. My focus has also been to stay focused on kitchen table issues like healthcare and economics impacting families. I am for expansion of Medicare. I'm a strong supporter of LGBTQ rights, and I believe in the U.S. should not have let the Paris Climate Accord. On breaking the glass ceiling, I famously said, maybe it will take a woman to clean up the house.
Okay, that last thing makes me think it's Hillary. I would think that person is going to be more on the Democrat side, but there is some balance there with the economic issues. But I would say that they're going to be more liberal. There you go.
You are correct. Yeah, it was Nancy Pelosi is who I pulled the quote from. So close on that.
My least favorite person.
So your third one. So this is a leader who regularly engaged in political purges. He condemned the rotten liberalism of those who tolerated discussion or dissent from his political party. He famously said, "Death is the solution to all problems. No man, no problem."
Wow. I like the way that guy thinks. Just kidding. Just kidding. That doesn't sound... Now, these people are not all Americans, are they?
No, this one's not an American.
Okay, that sounds like a Putin. That sounds Russian. I would say very authoritative, communist authoritative.
It was Stalin.
I was in the right place.
Okay, so then this last one's not a specific person. This is an overall group of people, okay?
Okay.
So people in this group are more likely to lean to the left and the right, but that does not mean that they lean towards any party. This group feels more negatively about politics and politicians than any other group of Americans.
Okay, so we're either talking about libertarians or we're talking about a generation.
Independents. Libertarians or independents?
I would say independents.
You got all the points.
What? Do I get a prize?
Sure. I will mail you a prize since we can't see each other for like another year.
That's true. All right, that was fun. So, political ideology. So, this is interesting. Tell me how your politics affects these different types of issues.
So, your politics will impact how you feel about different types of issues: social issues, domestic, economic, foreign policy. So we start with social issues. So things like abortion, gay marriage, gun buybacks, governmental mandates, women in combat. And the one I think we picked was medical marijuana. Where do you fall on this? I know a lot of states have already legalized medical marijuana, but should the federal government step in and do it as well? Or should it still be regulated? Should it still be illegal at the federal level?
And this, I think, is one of those issues where you really can see regionalism come into play. Because you will have certain states where even the conservatives are leaning towards medical marijuana, and then you have other states where even the liberals are not sure we should move in that direction.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the states, even Texas has moved more towards medical marijuana, but if you ask on marijuana generally, just overall, medical marijuana is the only one that they will touch. They won't go to recreational. So I think that on the social side of things, medical marijuana is more acceptable than, say, recreational marijuana would be. I don't see the Congress, and maybe I'm wrong, just saying, oh, any marijuana, recreational, et cetera, is fine at this point. Maybe in a few years, but not right now. That's just my guess.
This is really interesting because in my economics classes, we actually discuss the advantages and disadvantages of making all drugs legal. And before you just automatically go, oh my gosh, that's horrible, there are advantages to making all drug use legal. And the advantages would be, for example, lessering of crime. There would be the FDA would be able to regulate the purity of the product and would be able to tax it. So it is interesting when you think about these things. There are a lot of economic issues that come up even when you're talking about something, like marijuana.
Absolutely.
So for domestic issues, gun control, drug policy, gerrymandering, net neutrality, and term limits would be good examples for these. And we looked at, we picked gun control, that's the picture there, and what should be done about gun control. I think this has been a hot topic, especially if we go back to school shootings, but even we're seeing in the news today with protesters and shootings happening at the protests. So where do you fall on that? Do you think that we should go the route of some countries where you do gun buybacks and eliminate assault rifles, et cetera, or do you lean more towards, the purest thought of constitutional carry, for example? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Are you asking us that question?
Sure. No, I'm just kidding.
I think that was rhetorical.
Go for it. Go. Yeah.
Rhetorical. All right. So this is interesting. Political ideology. Okay, this one is the minimum wage. So the countries in green have the highest.
States.
That's what I mean, states. Which is interesting because I'd also be interested in seeing what the unemployment levels are in those states.
I think that's an interesting question. I didn't look up the unemployment, but I know, like in a lot of states, what is it? The $15 is kind of where some of them have gone to. Like in Washington, the $15 pay with some companies too. And I don't know, and this is more of an economic question. As more states go to those higher minimum wage rates, will they then push the federal government to do the same? I mean, at some point, as we get more dark green boxes, does that make sense? Will the federal government also follow suit? I think there becomes a tipping point. Does that make sense? With a lot of economic issues.
Yeah, and I would also like to point out, though, once the minimum wage got to 15 in Washington, that's when you saw a lot of the big companies relocate, which is why we now have Amazon coming to Texas, where we do not have that minimum wage.
Yeah, and also the tax breaks that the states are offering. That's like a double present to these companies. Like, we'll give you a tax break, and you don't have to pay the $15. So I think that's a really definitely an interesting way to kind of look at it. On the next one, foreign policy. Foreign policy issues will be whether we think we should still be a part of the United Nations or NATO, our foreign relations with different countries like Israel. How much or what countries receive foreign aid? We picked one that might be interesting to younger people, but the draft. Should we have a universal draft where, for example, everyone has to serve at least 1 year in the military?
Or the civil service.
Civil service, yeah, I guess.
And this is Elvis Presley's draft card.
The king.
Yes, the king.
Very interesting.
And I mean, this comes up politically because you have some people say, I don't, especially if you're not a supporter of military, do you want to serve in the military? But yet, should everyone as a civic duty also be a part of the military to experience that and to be to serve in some way the country? So I think it's an interesting way to kind of look at it.
Yeah, and what Misty brought up is interesting. If it wasn't just the military, if you had the option of also choosing to do something, like remember after the war, the what was it, the WWW that went in and fixed up all the state parks and things like that. That could be an option. I think it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, the last two bills that have been proposed to reestablish that have been military or civil service. Yeah, I think which there is an acknowledgement that military is not for everybody.
Yeah, it would be more attractive if it were presented that way for sure. I think you'd have more people on board with it, at least if it came up for a vote.
I think so too.
So at this point, we've talked about where you get your earliest influences, how you figure out where you're at on that chart politically. But now we want to throw in one more thing on top of all of that, and that's going to be party affiliation.
And I think the one thing with party affiliation is that even though there's a strong correlation between your ideology, your individual's ideology, and your party choice, because America holds a range of opinions on economic and social issues, they don't always fit really neatly into that left-right continuum we saw in the box. Does that make sense? So, there's a spectrum of individual beliefs and multiple dimensions to it that I think often aren't talked about.
I think something else that we forget too, if we look historically, is that the parties were actually never a part of the structure of our government. The Constitution doesn't have any political party embedded into it. So Madison in the Federalist Papers talks about factions, people forming factions of government to get what they want accomplished. To some extent, the political parties are those factions, but to a deeper extent, those factions kind of get absorbed into the political parties.
Interesting. So the owl is what? Independent? Smart? Or is that secretly like a French bulldog sitting on a branch?
Oh, I like that. The French bulldog party.
Let's have it be that.
So before we get too off in a tangent, I want to talk about factions that are straining the two major parties. So there is a group within the Democrats called the Justice Democrats. And their big push is, yes, they are liberals, and yes, they are supportive of the Democratic Party, but they want to get corporate money out of politics. And so they've picked certain people that they're supporting, and this is one of them they supported in New York. And this person was able to primary a representative that had been sitting for 31 years. So we're seeing some pushback within those parties against the establishment. And the same thing is happening on the other side as well. I'll pass this one off to Professor Cox.
So, sorry. Scott Tipton is a Republican out of Colorado, and basically he had served in Congress for 9 years, and the major factor in his loss was that he was not conservative enough. And I think that's always interesting. So his opponent basically came out and said, there's a picture of her wearing a gun on her hip, and that she's pro-gun, and that she's was more in line with religious and family ideals, and basically this idea that you're not far enough conservative can get you beat in the Republican Party. And I think that the Tea Party, we saw some of that. You saw some of that with the Tea Party early on, but even now there's I think with the era of Trump in particular, there's this idea that how conservative do you have to be to still fit within the Republican Party? How far do you have to lean?
And more recently, I believe that the Black Lives Matter movement is a subset of the Democratic Party. Is that correct?
That totally depends on what you're reading and who you ask.
Yeah, I think you see the Black Lives Matter and some of the more progressive in those majority-minority districts. You'll see candidates that really promote Black Lives Matter or progressive ideals defeating long-term, I'm going to say this, white, older male incumbent Democrats.
Which is what you saw in New York.
Yeah, exactly. Those the majority-minority districts are the ones that are most up in the air, where they have the best chance of overthrowing those long-term Democrats, I think.
Okay, good to know. All right, so here we go. So I may think I'm independent, but you're saying that I actually might not be. Is that correct?
Yes and no.
And I agree, yes and no.
So independents are very, very, very important because most elections are going to come down to your independents. Your hardliners, either ideologically or partisan, are not going to cross those aisles, right? So independence is where you make or break an election. However, because those people are not hardlined, they're also not as emotionally or as informed as some of your other voters might be. So it's a double-edged sword.
And I agree. You always kind of, in political science, look at a bell curve when you're looking at who are you trying to attract as a voter. So as the bell curve kind of bubbles out in the center, that's where the independents are, and then you have your more hardliners on the edges of the curve. And so if you're going to win an election, you have to shoot for that bubble, the middle independent block to win. It's very rare that you can win just with your hardcore base. But I think with independents, I think too what this shows is that in the United States, you have two major parties that really control politics. So at some point, you got to choose. I mean, the Green Party, for example, isn't likely to win a lot of elections. The Libertarian Party in a lot of states does not win a lot of elections. So as an independent, you might have to jump on board the Democrat or Republican train at some point. I think that's also, too, where this can play in.
And I think that's especially true in the national elections. I think locally, your independents probably have more of a shot at winning as an independent.
I agree. Yeah, because here, for example, in Texas, libertarians do fine, in some races. So I think it does matter what type of election you're talking about, for sure.
Yeah, I heard a really good analogy that sort of speaks to this. And it was if you don't find yourself agreeing with either party, you think of it like a bus trip, and you basically take the bus that goes the closest to where you're going, knowing that the bus isn't going to go exactly where you want. And I think that's a really good analogy for the fact that no one, I don't believe, is 100% in line with everything for one party. So you just sort of have to vote on the ideas of that party rather than so much the candidates. So
and I take that the other way.
Oh, okay. What?
I hope that most of our students actually are in this independent area, because then if you are trying to get candidates to win your vote, you can pull them to your positions.
That's true, but not as voting as an independent. I mean, you have to, if you're going to vote in a national election and it's Democrat versus Republican, and you do a write-in for some, random person, you're basically throwing your vote away. You're not proving anything to anyone. But I do agree, if you can get a block of people together and say, we like what you're saying, except we really feel strongly about this. If you will support this, then we will vote for you. For sure, there would definitely be, the ability to sway a candidate if you've got the numbers.
And probably your best time to do that is going to be in the primary.
Yeah.
When your voice is louder than in the general.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I also think that if you think about, the generation that's voting, and we have to look at by age and the blocks that you're coming up for, Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomers, whatever, they vote differently, and we see more independent thought, I think, in the baby generations, the newer ones, I would say, than we've ever seen before. And I see in my students them really questioning and kind of digging in and analyzing and thinking critically about these candidates and, where these parties actually stand. And I think that's a positive trend, and I hope that continues.
Absolutely.
I hope that they're thinking critically and analyzing and really kind of getting involved, because otherwise you're just buying into what you're told. I mean, hopefully you're not being a robot.
And it's absolutely okay to split your vote.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But you do not have to vote straight party ticket, and I think you shouldn't. I think you should go candidate by candidate.
I agree.
And I think if you're an independent and you've thought critically about the candidates, it allows for you to do that. That's why that iSide quiz that I put the link, that we have the link in there for, I like, because it does kind of lay out, here's the candidates that fall within these categories by percent, and it gives you an idea to kind of look at, these candidates more than just the parties.
Right.
So all of this is theoretical until you're actually registered to vote. And so we really, really do hope that you decide to register to vote for this upcoming election, if you're able to. So the deadline to register is October 5th, and this is a little bit tricky. This means that you either need to be completely registered, like have your registration card in hand by October 5th, or you need to have the card that you fill out to get registered postmarked by October 5th. So the earlier the better, the earlier the safer. The sooner you do this, the more you are guaranteed to be able to vote, because you do have to be registered 30 days before the election.
Okay, I have a question. Let's pretend that I'm a student and I live in Oklahoma, but I'm going to school here and living with, my parents. So how do I vote if I'm registered in another state? Can I still vote?
So you're going to school in Oklahoma and you're...
No, I'm going to school here, but I'm registered to vote in Oklahoma. So how do I do that?
Okay, so you do have to be registered to vote in this state, and you have to have residency to do that.
Okay.
So you can't, because otherwise you could vote in 2 states, and we don't want you to do that because that's illegal and dangerous.
Could I not get an absentee ballot?
Yes, you can do that.
And
sorry, Angela, I thought you were asking if you could vote in 2 places. I'm like,
no.
What are you trying to do?
That's what I thought too. I'm sorry.
Don't do that.
No, I'm giving you the segue to explain absentee ballots.
Oh, I thought you were trying to commit voter fraud.
I thought the same thing. I'm sorry.
Don't commit voter fraud. That's the main takeaway from today. Don't commit voter fraud.
Do that.
But I can, if I'm registered in another state, I can request online an absentee ballot.
Yeah, and if you're in the military and you're overseas, you can absolutely do that.
And where you do that is the Secretary of State for each state is the election official. So if you just go in and Google Secretary of State for Oklahoma, that will give you the Secretary of State's website. On all the Secretary of State websites that I've looked, and I've looked at most of the Secretary of State websites, there is a place usually on their front page that takes you to their voting page, which talks about registration, absentee ballots, military, disability voting, all of that stuff. It's on the Secretary of State's website for each state. So Texas, you'd look up Secretary of State, Texas.
This year, early voting is extended. Governor Abbott signed that, so we can have some extra time. I highly, highly, highly encourage you to vote early because you're going to have fewer people there. It's quick, you're in and out, and less exposure to COVID. But of course, you have until actual election day, which is November 3rd.
All right. And then do I need to take anything with me when I go vote?
So best practice is to take your driver's license and your voting card. But if you're early voting, they'll have the rolls. And as long as you have your driver's license and you're a registered voter, you'll be fine.
What if I don't have a driver's license? Can I take my school ID?
As far as like what you can take on the Secretary of State's and it's votetexas.gov, they have a list of all the documents that they'll accept, and they also have the polling locations, because I know one thing with early voting is you can vote anywhere there's a polling location within the county during early voting, but you have to go to your precinct on November 3rd, election day, which gets more tricky if you don't know where your precinct is. But the Secretary of State's office online for Texas has the ID requirements, where you vote, how you vote, the dates, the whole thing is all listed there.
And I went and put that link in the chat.
I saw you. I did it right after you.
Oh,
sorry.
So yeah, you can click on that link in the chat.
Texas.gov.
Okay, we have a question. Can you still vote through the mail?
You can. Let's see. The last day to apply for ballot by mail is Friday, October 23rd. received, not postmarked. I'm actually looking at the Secretary of State's website. So, and then it says that Tuesday, November 3rd at 7 p.m. if a carrier envelope is not postmarked. Oh goodness, they get really complicated. And I have not gone through the training to be a registrar, so this is all fun. But yes, you can. There are rules about voting by mail. You have to. You can't. I think the big thing that's coming up right now is COVID. Is COVID a reason? If you have other underlying health conditions that you think COVID might expose you to, that could be a way you could vote by mail. But Texas does not offer vote by mail to everyone. You're allowed to absentee vote by mail if you're going to be out of your home county during the election, if you're disabled, jailed, or 65 years or older. But fear of voting in person during a pandemic, the courts have said, is not a disability. So, like I said, even if you do qualify to vote by mail in Texas, you got to really watch your deadlines because they got to have your the officials have to have your application in their possession by October 23rd, if I'm correct on that. Is that right, Misty? I think that's the right date, October 23rd.
Yeah, and for most of us, because most of us aren't going to be voting by mail, that October 5th deadline is the one we need to focus on.
Yeah, the
postmarked by. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you're not already registered. And again, you can go to the same website and check and see if you're already registered. Because some of you might have registered in high school and you just forgot about it.
Right. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I don't think most people are going to qualify unless you're jailed or 65 or truly have a documented disability. It's going to be very hard, I think. I think they're going to be very picky about it.
But seriously, go vote early. I've never waited longer than 10 minutes. You're in, you're out. It's easy.
I timed myself from parking to voting and back in my car last time. It took me 15 minutes. Now, I take a cheat sheet with me. I go ahead and know who I'm going to vote for. I have a little piece of paper. They've never questioned me. I take that in there and I just, click on the little tablet that they have set up, and I'm in and out. And I literally time myself. It's 15 minutes.
Okay, those are very, very good ideas. So basically what you're suggesting is that everyone research the items that will be on the ballot in advance. So you're at home, you have plenty of time to Google every side of it. Then you make your little cheat sheet of what you're going to vote for. And then you go vote early using your cheat sheet so you're not confused. And then success, right?
Yeah, and if you want to know what's on the ballot, that same site, the Secretary of State's website, the votetexas.gov, also has a What's on the Ballot tab.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the chat.
So upcoming this semester, we have 4 more webinars that we hope that you will attend. And it'll be the same thing. You will have 48 hours after they air for you to get credit for watching them. And when we leave them up, so you can go back, I think this is our 3rd or 4th year now of doing this. So if you just really, really enjoyed this for some reason and you wanted to see some old ones, feel free. Knock yourself out. They're there.
And you can, you can subscribe and you can go back and look at all the old ones, which are so fascinating, in my opinion.
They're really good. They are. All right. So I know the big question right now is, how do you get credit? You listen to this whole thing. You are getting registered to vote. You have absorbed all of this knowledge, but you also want credit.
Right.
So in the chat box right now, there is a link to a Google form. Fill out that form, and that is how you get credit. That form isn't for 48 hours. After 48 hours, we stop the link. We send out to your instructors everyone who attended, and that's how you get credit. Some of your instructors will type it in immediately and you'll get credit. Some will give you credit at the end of the semester. So make sure you read the syllabus and find out how your instructor does it. And
now, what if they want to rewatch this recording?
All right, let me get the link to the channel. And I will put that in the chat for everyone as well.
So you can rewatch this as many times as you want or show it to your friends and family. It would be great dinner time conversation. And then you can click on the link that Misty has posted, and that is what you need to fill out in order to get credit. If you do not fill that form out, you will not get credit because you won't be counted as having participated. So filling out the form is important. So I'm not seeing any more questions, but if you have any last minute questions, write them in the chat.
And one more thing on the forum. You guys were always looking for ideas for future webinar series and episodes. So if you have something you're just dying to see looked into, please put that on the forum.
Okay, and I'm putting that in the chat as well. Okay, I think we're done. I'd like to thank Professor Cox. This was very interesting, and I'm pumped to go vote.
Yes, everyone go vote.
Go vote. Yes, thank you guys.
All right.
Y'all have a good afternoon. Thank you for everyone for coming.
Afternoon.
Thank
you guys. Bye.
Bye.